Trump uses really clumsy language. There's a great many things he says that we may not agree with, but his fundamental point about NATO has substance. And 11 nations paying the requisite amount of money is better than it was. And it's better than it was in part because of what's happening in Ukraine. But let's not kid ourselves, also in part because of what Trump had said to nations. You know, the alliance needs all nations to pay its way.
Among the stories on the front page of the Times this morning, Donald Trump says the US will 100% stay in NATO. But here's the catch. As long as Europe plays fair. He wants European nations to up their defence spending to meet obligations to the pact. He was speaking to Nigel Farage on GB News.
NATO has to treat the U.S. fairly, because if it's not for the United States, NATO literally doesn't even exist. But they took advantage of us, like most countries do. It's more important to them than it is to us. We have an ocean in between some problems, okay? We have a nice, big, beautiful ocean. And it's more important for them. They were taking advantage, and they did. They took advantage of us on trade, and they took advantage on...
So if they play fair, if they start to play fair, America's there?
Yes, 100%.
Now, in terms of what the UK spends on defence, a lot of people have been sticking their oar in. Several ministers called for an increase to 2.5% of GDP. And then the Defence Secretary himself, Grant Shapps, came out for 3%. But Jeremy Hunt's budget did not include any increase at all. And today, a group of former defence and security chiefs warn that Britain needs to genuinely prepare for war if our armed forces are to be a credible deterrent. Among them is Major General Rupert Jones, a former deputy commander of the US-led counter-ISIS coalition. We can speak to him now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
A senior figure in NATO told, I think it was Grant Shapps, that the British Army was no longer graded Tier 1. Now, first of all, what does that mean? What's Tier 1 and what's Tier 2 when it comes to an army?
Look, there's no hard definition, but what it alludes to is, are you at the absolute top table? Have you got all of the capabilities that you need to fight at the forefront of an alliance? If I could take an orchestra as an analogy, you know, you've got to have all the instruments, you've got to have all the top players, you've got to have enough violinists if you want to be a main player army. And we have made false choices over the last 20 years. We've hollowed out the British Army to a very considerable degree. Again, follow my analogy, we just don't have enough violinists. But what we've also done is we've said, actually, and we don't need any oboe players, and, you know, we'll get rid of the cello. Before you know it, you're not an orchestra. And there's a real danger. That is where the British Army is today. And we've got a land war going on in Europe. And a new government, you've been talking about the upcoming election, a new government must take this very seriously, not least because what Trump is talking about, but we have a responsibility to NATO to take a leading role.
Is this just about money? You say it's been hollowed out over the last 10 or 20 years, presumably that spending is not at the level that you want it to be. What has the justification been for that? Because this has been going on for some time. Sometimes on this programme, we have spoken to people who've said, well, you know, the threat now, it's not necessarily a military threat, it's a cyber threat, it's this, it's that. Is that the justification that has been used over the last 10 years or so?
I mean, I certainly think there's been a bit of that. There's been a sense that, you know, you can cyber your way to security. Look, cyber and other smart technology is essential to our national security, but is a fool's errand to think that that is instead of what you might call hard power. You know, defense is about deterring adversaries, deterring President Putin, deterring other possible adversaries. That requires a war-ready military, and our military has been hollowed out very, very significantly. So is it just about money? No, of course it's not. We've got to be much smarter how we spend our money. That there's no question about that. We will continue to use antiquated approvals processes. So some really boring things that need to be reviewed and modernized in Whitehall. So we've got to spend our money better. But look, defense is expensive and nations need to be prepared to commit those funds. There's been a lot of talk through Ukraine about a lack of munitions. War consumes vast amounts of munitions and you can't prepare them quickly. The British Army has been talking about this for about 10 years, highlighting to ministers, that the kind of arsenal you need for war is simply not there, and a new government has got to take this seriously.
Okay, well, we'll see if they will. The point that Donald Trump was making about NATO, um, many people see him as a figure of fun. They don't like him. They don't listen to him. But did he have a point? He might have expressed it in a slightly clumsy way before, that European countries actually should be. There is a level at which that they're supposed to contribute, and I think only 11 out of 19 of them have got to that. I mean, why is that acceptable?
Well, I mean, look, it's not, and I would entirely agree with your characterization. Trump uses really clumsy language. There's a great many things he says that we may not agree with, but his fundamental point about NATO has substance. And 11 nations paying the requisite amount of money is better than it was. And it's better than it was in part because of what's happening in Ukraine. But let's not kid ourselves, also in part because of what Trump had said to nations. The alliance needs all nations to pay its way. And the United States undoubtedly pays more than most other nations, not more than all as a percentage, but more than most. And the United Kingdom is one of NATO's leading defense nations, and it has to demonstrate leadership. It can't leave key functions to other nations and say, hey, look, we'll just come and do some of the smart stuff. We'll do cyber and things. Alliances don't work like that. Orchestras don't work like that.
Okay. Rupert Jones, thank you. Major General Rupert Jones, former Deputy Commander of the US-led counter-ISIS coalition.
Thanking Trump effectively for driving increased NATO spending. And he did it when he was president. He talked about it then, and he's talked about it since. And whatever people might think of Donald Trump, maybe that is sensible.